It's time to laugh. It's time to learn. This is Funny Like a Clown Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth, March 28th, 2021. This is episode 103. Cruising right along. Hey, I'll go for many as it takes. I don't know. As always, today's episode is brought to you... Whoa! That's me sneezing right there. Hey, some people got a sneeze button. I sneeze. That's what you do. Today's episode is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory taste at game time, there's only one G Vegas, available at www.gvegas.webs.com. And, man, the stuff's good. That's all I can tell you. It's good. You like buffalo sauce, you got to try the G Vegas. Hey, you know, I'm in a town called Gardner, a little town outside of Boston, Beantown. So I know about this comic we're about to discuss. We do comedy here, and today's comedian we're going to be discussing is another Boston guy. He's from Cambridge, another bigger city outside of Boston. I'm from a little city outside of Boston. He's from Cambridge, which is a big city right outside of Boston. The one, the only, the legend, Dane Cook. Wow, I mean, if you're a Boston comic and you're on the scene, you know, Lenny Clark, he's the local comic we all looked up. He's the godfather of the Boston comedy scene here, man. He's like the #1 comic on the scene. But Dane Cook, he's the next level. He's not on the Boston scene anymore. He's traveling the world because he hit it big, and he started right here in Boston, which is always a cool thing because I do a lot of shows at the clubs in Boston, and it's always cool when you hit a stage and you're telling jokes, and it's like, man, I'm on the same stage Dane friggin' Cook used to practice on. This is pretty cool, you know, and he started and got big before I started doing comedy, but some of the older comics that I work with, they did work with him back when he was a nobody and working, you know, Elks clubs and Eagles halls like the rest of us. So, you know, they remember working with the guy. I remember it was a little bar down in Athol, which is another town, smaller town outside of Gardner, and just a little tiny bar, and that's, you know, that's where you start. Everybody thinks you start out in the big arenas like Dane. No, he paid his dues just like the rest of us, then he hit it big. Let's see, released 5 comedy albums: Harmful If Swallowed, Retaliation, Vicious Circle, Rough Around the Edges, Live from Madison Square Garden, and Isolated Incident. Retaliation was the highest charted comedy album in 28 years. It went platinum, which in the comedy world, if you just go gold, that's like unheard of, okay, to go gold. But to go platinum with a comedy album, no. That's reserved for musicians. You don't do that with a comedy album. Well, Dane Cook did it, man, and first guy in 28 years to do it. Led to some HBO comedy specials and stuff, Comedy Central stuff that he did. He's known for, I guess, his vulgar and dark humor, I guess, early on, which, you know, I've watched him. I mean, compared to today's guys and the guys I grew up watching, I thought he was kind of tame. But I guess for today's sensitive society that's offended by everything, I guess if you say hi, it's considered offensive. So I guess some of the kids today would consider him dark humor. But if he grew up in the 80s like I did, he's nothing even close to dark humor, okay? So go listen to Andrew Dice Clay and Sam Kinison and then come back and talk to me about how vulgar Dane Cook is. I think, you know, he's not even on the level, but for today's society, you know, that's what you get. I guess best known in the comedy world, he was actually, you know, everybody does it now. We're on the social media is such a big thing, but back when it wasn't a big thing, he was the first guy to use a personal webpage on MySpace, which before Facebook and you know, Twitter and all this stuff was big. You know, MySpace, that was the place all the kids were at, and he was the first one to think about using that, you know, as a platform to get his name as a comedian out there, man. And he had, you know, friend request and play people from all over the world that never even heard of him. Just, hey, I'm a comedian, follow me, this is my thing I'm doing, and ended up blowing up for him. He had followers all over the world, you know, that never even met the guy, you know. So, you know, the internet took you from a place, you know. You used to hop in your car and have to drive around the country and go comedy club to comedy club and college to college to get your name out there, just countrywide, never mind worldwide. Well, the internet's a whole new apple, you know. I mean, you don't have to go travel the world to be a star anymore. You can sit at your home and click a few buttons and you can be a world star. So, you know, I said that back in the old days. If you wanted to be a serious comic, you could start anywhere. But if you want to go serious and big time, you had to move to New York or LA. That was it. The only way you were going to make it big time. Well, it's not like that anymore, you know. Look at the Joe Rogan podcast. That's hitting more people than the Tonight Show has available to him. So, I mean, this guy can sit anywhere he wants and have a bigger platform than TV's Tonight Show out of L.A. So, not that it has the history of, the Tonight Show, obviously, but who knows someday? Hey, you can be a star from little towns like Gardner, Massachusetts with Funny Like a Clown podcast. You can be a star from anywhere nowadays. And, hey, genius move. Nowadays, everybody's using the social media, but he was the first one to start it, to hit it big time. So he was ahead of his time, thinking big time, and set the platform for the rest of us to do it. Had a bigger movie history than I know. I did watch a couple of his movies, and I thought they were good. And you watch a movie, it's either good, bad, or great. It's like it's bad, you don't even remember half of the movie afterward. If it's good, you say, yeah, it was worth watching once, and you remember, roughly what it was about. Then you got the great movies like Star Wars, which go into a phenomenon another level. But I thought he had some good movies. I didn't, which I didn't watch them all. I mean, from what I found out, and, I watched a couple of his earlier ones, so maybe his later ones, which I guess they were big money makers at the box office. But he was in Mystery Men Waiting, Employee of the Month, Good Luck Chuck, Dan in Real Life, Mr. Brooks, and My Friend's Girl, which I saw Employee of the Month, and I did. I cracked up at that movie, but, I mean, it was more, he chose some good sub-characters to put in there with him, which, I mean, together they kind of clicked and catch a niche, and you kind of involved in them. I thought it was a good movie. Like I said, not a great, but I thought it was a good movie, definitely worth watching, one I do remember. I guess I'm going to have to look into watching this one. When he was in what Mr. Brooks, I guess he did with Kevin Costner, which I'm a big fan of his, and to see those two of those, and I guess that one grossed really, really big time at the box office, so I guess that'd be one of the movies on my list I got to see. So go Dane Cook, working with Kevin Costner. Could we all dream of working with Kevin Costner someday? Brought this up before, voice work, man. He was in the animated series Planes, so you always get into that voice work. There's big money, for your voice, if you can voice a character. And I got a movie coming out myself, The World Needs a New Superhero. It's about my character, the child support superhero. And other than that, we're going to be doing a web series about, it's actually going to be puppets, and I'm voicing some of the puppets. It's the child support Superboy. So we're going to take you back to the childhood of this child support superhero. But that's what I'm doing. We're here to talk about Dane Cook. What's he doing? This one's big right here, because, I mean, this was unheard of at the time, okay, because when you're a comedian, you do clubs, and if you're really good, you start to do halls, and if you do real good, you start to hit theaters, and that's about as big as you're going to get. I mean, if you're doing theaters, you've hit the top of the game. He was only the second comedian after Andrew Dice Clay to sell out Madison Square Garden. I mean, can you imagine doing that as a comedian? I mean, forget the theaters, all right, the top of the game. Now you're selling out arenas, okay? I mean, you start selling out arenas, that's a phenomena. That's unheard of in the comedy world, to sell out an arena, okay? That's reserved for the Beatles, That's reserved for, the Van Halens, the Led Zeppelins, the AC/DCs. Comics don't sell out arenas. Well, hey, following in Andrew Dice Clay's footsteps many years later, he was able to sell out arenas. So, I guess he started comedy back in junior high school. He said he was a really shy kid, but he overcame his shyness by trying out stand-up comedy, which I can relate to because I wasn't really shy. But, whenever I was young, my father was a nutty. Army messed him up, but he was ready to go to war, man, okay? There weren't no war going on. He'd go to war with his family, and that was me. So whenever I opened my mouth, he'd yell at me. He just loved to yell like a drill sergeant. So, nobody can believe today that I do comedy. Like, you were so quiet as a kid. It's like, well, wasn't that I didn't have anything to say. It was my father yell at me every time I opened my mouth. So, now it's all coming out. So he said, he overcame his shyness by trying stand-up comedy in junior high school, which I had never spoken in front of people before in my life. So I had to come over that fear of speaking in front of people and realize, they want to hear what you got to say if you got something good. So it's something you got to come over. So a good way to overcome your standoffishness if you have it. I guess he studied graphic design as a backup to comedy, in case who makes it as a comedian, you can actually get paid, you're doing good. So you always need a backup plan. And I guess from his graphic design days, he still designs his own album covers, and he does all his artwork for his stuff there because that's what he studied if he didn't make it as comic, which comes in useful because now he gets to do that as a comic. And I went to high school for auto body, so I could always go back to do auto body if I wanted to. It was always a good fallback plan. I didn't follow it, but I had it if I had to in my arsenal. Let's see, 1990, okay, after starting in junior high school, he got out, he started performing in clubs. 1992, he thought what was going to be a big break for him. Him and a local, some sketch comics, they got in with radio station WBCN, which was one of the big stations in Boston at the time, rock station. They were sponsoring an event at the Boston Garden, which that's where the Celtics play, that's where the Bruins play. If you're from Boston, that's the ultimate right there to play at the Garden. If you're performing there, you get no bigger out of Boston right there. And they all thought this was going to be their big break, and it was part of a music thing. I guess they were like, they got to go on later in the show, but there was a bunch of musicians. The crowd wasn't expecting comedy. They went out there, and like they didn't want comedy, they wanted the rock. So I guess they started chanting they want the Spin Doctors. They wouldn't listen to them. All of a sudden, it turned into a bad thing for them. They started throwing shoes on stage, okay, with the comics. And finally, the comics started pleading with us, can you please just calm down, let us do our thing, we'll have fun, then we'll get to the Spin Doctors. And that just, instead of calming them down, that just escalated more. I guess they started to throw lighters up there, like metal Zippo lighters they're throwing at these guys. And I guess they got a couple injuries. A couple of lighters hit them, and he said, have you ever bombed in comedy? He said that was one of his worst experiences, right? But I can imagine, you're in the biggest venue. This is like the biggest chance of my life to get to this many people, to play that kind of a venue. This is what's going to break me. And then just to have it go terribly wrong like that. And I had that happen. I was a young comic. I was nailing it on the local scene. Then one of the big comedy clubs at the casino, they were having a contest down there. I entered the contest, and I went in there. And I did the worst thing I could have done. Instead of sticking to my act, I'm like, no, I got to change my act. I'm going to a bigger place, and I got to do what they expect rather than what I was. And I went in there, and I didn't really have a great set, and I regretted, to this day, I still regret. I didn't do in and do what got me there. Instead, I tried to change and be somebody I was not. But learned my lesson. I never did that again. So that's part of growing as a comic. You learn your lessons on night like that. And he said one of his dreams was to someday go back and perform there and make up for the bad night that he had. And years later, he definitely did that. 1994, he moved to New York City, so, you hit it about as big as you can on the Boston scene. And they say Boston's a great place for comedy, is a great place for opportunity. If you're going to build, you come to Boston. Once you build, then you go to either New York. 1994, he moved to New York, did the scene there for a couple years. 1996, he moved to L.A., where he still resides to this day out in L.A. 1998, his big break was on Comedy Central's Premium Blend, and where they showcase, some of the young and up-and-coming comics. So I guess somebody caught his eye out there in L.A., being little tiny piece on Premium Blend. That led to the 2000 Comedy Central Half Hour Presents. And I remember I loved the Comedy Central Half Hour Presents. It's a young up-and-coming comics, which a veteran comic, they got to do over an hour. If you're headlining a show, you got to be able to do over an hour of comedy. But the young comics, they got about a half hour worked out, and they were showcasing the young comics and giving them a half hour to say, hey, this is the next guy, do you like him? And they used to do marathons. You sit home and they do like a half hour of each one all weekend of every comic they had. I used to sit home all, would just watch one after another all weekend. I couldn't get enough. And it'd hit Monday and I'd be like, no, I want more. I don't want to go to work. I want more. I love those shows. I guess he had one of the ones that stood out even more. From the half hour comedy special, he then won Comedy Central's Stand-Up Showdown 2 times in a row, and just to win it once and all those comics would be something. Win it 2 times in a row, then you're the reigning champ, I guess you would say. So 2003 ended up releasing his first CD, which as we mentioned, it went platinum. And from that he signed a contract with Comedy Central Records. Now here's a big one right here. He was the first comic in 27 years. Which, years ago, you could make a comedy album, and you'd have to go down to the record store and buy it. Then, you could hand it around to a few friends, but if you wanted it, you had to buy it yourself, okay? First comic in 27 years to have comedy album in the top 5 on Billboard, which with today's free downloaded on the internet, you can't do that anymore because you don't have to buy a comedy album. You just get it free on the internet, so... To pull that off in today's day and age, 27 years later, last time it was done, it was in 1978, where Steve Martin's Wild and Crazy Guy hit number 2. So, I mean, just to be on Billboard's charts, now you're in with all the musical artists, too, so your album's right up there with all the musical artists, where they're buying, buying these albums, so, that's quite the feat, I mean, it was quite the feat back when Steve Martin did it, just to have a comedian in with, I mean, everybody was saying King Tut, but, I mean, that was big, but, I mean, To mark that in the internet day and age, that's really something to be said right there. The MTV Awards named the Best New Artist of the Year. 2005, he did HBO's Vicious Circle, where he was in a big circle in an arena, which was the TD Break North Garden, which was the one that he had people throwing stuff at him years earlier. So he went back and made good. He sold out the garden, and they were all there for comedy that night. Big circle. They filmed it, released it, and I think that was one of his biggest ones today was Vicious Circle. That's what I remember him for. But I remember like walking around in that circle on just a circular stage, talking to each part of the stadium, and it's like, come on, I want that to be me. You want it to be you so bad. But hey, good for him. He went back and made good on his promise that someday he was going to go back and he was going to knock the place dead, and he did it. You know, now here's an educational one. The guy's at the top of his game, and you figure everybody want a piece of him. He shot a TV pilot called Cooked, and they didn't pick it up. Now, you'd think this guy at the top of his game, TV be dying to pick him up, but I guess that's how hard it is to make it in the TV business, that even a guy at the top of his game, and, you know, they chose not to pick up his TV show. So, you know, I had a TV show, The Comedy Kitchen, just a local TV show, but had some big stars on it, man, you know, big names in comedy, and, to this day, I'm very proud of the work we put out, because you know, if you're shooting a TV show with NBC or CBS or ABC or one of the big networks or Fox, you got a huge budget. Okay, you do it locally. It's all volunteers, you know, and it's like it's tough with volunteers to get people to volunteer to be a part of your thing. But so hey, Dane Cook, he's trying, he's succeeding. Some things go big, some things go wrong. It happens to even the biggest stars. So don't think if something goes bad for you at work this week, don't think, hey, it's just me. It happens to the big stars, too. It happens to anybody. He embarked on a 30-day, 20-show college tour, which, I mean, if you're hitting different colleges, you have to drive all over to do that. To hit 20 of them in 30 days, I mean, that's a travel schedule. You got to be young, I guess, to take that kind of a beating right there, man. 20 shows in 30 days going around college to college. I guess you perform, you sleep, you wake up, you perform, you sleep, you wake up, you perform. That's all you're pretty much doing. There ain't much time for much in between. But, hey, you want to get your name out there, that's what you got to do. 2005, he did the one thing that every comedian could only dream of, and few get to do. He hosted Saturday Night Live, and Bill Burr, another Boston guy, he recently just did it, and everybody was just glued to their TV. They were so happy for him. Just like, that's the dream. And he said he walked in there and he was so respectful instead of acting like, you know, hey, I'm hot shit comic now, I'm here. But he said, you know, if you act respectful, they're going to help you out and try to make you look good as good as they can. And it's such a holy place for comedians, because that's where, you know, that's where TV, you know, you couldn't do it prime time. You know, that was where they started to get a little bit edgy on TV with the comedy. It was late night stuff. And what a show it's been for us years later. There have been many competitors, but they've all gone, and Saturday Night is still around because they were the original. Let's see, 2006, he chose to headline Dave Attell's Insomniac Tour. And, you know, I mean, you got to stick with your friends in comedy. You know, you got your circle of friends in comedy. And I guess Dave Attell was a guy that he hooked on with. And, you know, it's always flattering when somebody comes calling for you, you know. I always get a charge out of when somebody calls me up and books me for a show. And it's like, yeah, they requested you, man. They wanted you. They saw you last time. And they're like, hey, they wanted me. All right, man. That's always a charge. So always good when somebody wants you. It's nice to be wanted. He hosted the Teen Choice Awards, I believe, with Jessica Simpson that year. Which, you know, his audience, the MySpace audience, it wasn't like he was hitting older people. It was all the young kids that were coming out to see this guy. So, you know, he's playing to his audience there. 2006, he won the VH1 Big Award, saying he was, you know, almost too big for his own good. The guy was just, like, everywhere. He was so big at this point. Rolling Stones Hot Comic of the Year, another one, you know, just all the Saturday Night Lives, the Rolling Stones. I mean, this is all stuff we just grew up, you know. You know, you're at the top of the game if you're doing these things, just the legendary installations. 2007, he broke the Laugh Factory's endurance record, which was previously held by Richard Pryor, so that shows you how long it must have held for. He broke the record by performing for 3 hours and 50 minutes. And which, I mean, like I said, if you can do an hour in comedy, that's something to behold. If you can do 3 hours and 50 minutes in comedy and not do new material, just have that much material in your arsenal, that's something. Didn't hold for long, though. 5 days later, it was then broke by Dave Chappelle. So I guess, hey, you got 4 or 5 hours of comedy. I mean, that's your life right there. That's a heck of an accomplishment. Just to remember that many jokes, never mind do them. Let's see, in 2012, I guess, was the start of a little bit of a controversial career he had. He got in some trouble in Colorado. I guess they had a shooting in Colorado, and he made a joke about the shooting, which it went viral, which it was just, they say too soon, I mean, that was a really dark thing, you have a school shooting or something, you got to pick and choose, the things you're going to joke about, which, like I said, nowadays everybody's offended by something, but, when I took a class on comedy, it said, the three things you don't touch are race, religion, and disease. I mean, like, I can't make fun of another race because I'm not that, but I come from German descent, so I make fun of Germans. That's okay because I'm making fun of myself, but I can't make fun of other races because I'm not them. So, you know, uh, religion, that's such a sin. I remember Sinead O'Connor once went on Saturday Night Live, and without telling him, she ripped up a picture of the Pope, and her career was over. You don't rip up a picture of the Pope. That's not something you do. And disease, I mean, you can't sit there and tell jokes about cancer unless you have it, because if you have it, again, you're making fun of yourself. If you don't, you're an ass for making fun of people with cancer. So they had a horrible shooting in Colorado. He chose to make a joke about it, which, when you're a comedian, you got to do something new. You got to do something edgy. You got to do something that's going to be remembered. But it's a fine line where, are you going to be remembered or you're going to be remembered as an ass. And so he ended up being remembered as an ass. He did go on Twitter. He apologized for it. He said, "My heart's with the families. It was not meant to be offensive," which, it was just a joke, which me as a comedian, I understand that because, I've done things like that where sometimes you go too far with an audience and they get upset and you think to yourself, I probably shouldn't have went that far. But the average person, they're not as forgiving as a comic who's been there, I mean, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. So, I mean, to the general public, he's an ass no matter what the guy does, I guess. But, hey, he went on. I mean, what do? You apologize and you move on. What else are you gonna? If somebody wants to beat you down the rest of your life, then I guess that's on them. And, it takes a big man to accept somebody's apology if they're truly wrong. Say, all right, you apologized. Let's move on. It takes a big man to apologize and admit they're wrong. Because nowadays these kids don't want to admit they're wrong about nothing. They'll argue with you from now until the end of time that they're right, rather than be man enough to say, you know what, you're right, I messed up and I'm sorry. So if you say you're sorry, forgiveness may come. Okay, if you try to act like an ass and think you're not wrong the rest of your life, probably not. I guess another dark place in his comedy. Now, I mean, this guy, he's done stuff in comedy, the local guy could never dream of. I mean, he was in, at the peak of his career, he's in with the Carlins and the Pryors, and the biggest of his time. I mean, the biggest of that generation, one of the biggest comics. But he got a lot of accusations of plagiarism. Joe Rogan, who's another Boston guy who started in the Boston, accused him of stealing premises of some of his jokes, which I'm sure back when they were local comics in Boston, Joe and Dane, they worked a lot of shows together, and which, sometimes, you hear a joke and you don't plagiarize it, but it gets you thinking, like, well, that's your take of what happened in that situation. If that situation happened the way, well, this would be my take. And where it's a completely different joke, you're still using that comic's premise, which, people want to hear something new. It's like, somebody comes out with a premise. Yeah, I went to a donut shop and this happened. Well, everybody goes to a donut shop and something happened. Nobody's looking for that. They're looking for something different, So if a comic comes up with a really different routine, like, I mean, I'm one of the few, doing a superhero about child support. So, I mean, that's kind of my known routine I'm known for. If somebody else started doing it, I'd be kind of like, hey, yeah, I was already doing that. That was my idea. Even if the routine was totally different. So, I mean, I can see where some people, but I mean, when you're at that level, it's tough to come up with new ideas. That's why a lot of the late night shows, they have writers, they have comedy writers. You can't come up with that much every night of the week. You're going to come up with a new joke. It's impossible. You got to have some writers. So, I guess he went on Joe Rogan's podcast years later, and Joe said, I don't think it was an intentional thing. I think it was just, probably in his head. He went looking for jokes, and Amy Schumer got accused of that too, where some of her jokes, they'd play them, and then they play another joke from another person, and you hear they kind of sound similar, but it happens, Sometimes you come up with the same ideas as other people, and it wasn't intentional. You just both had the same idea, So how many times in life you had the same idea as somebody else? It happens in comedy too. Let's see. There were also allegations of similarities, again, to some of the premises on his albums that Louis C.K. had on some of his albums that were released previous to his, and Louis C.K., another Boston guy. So, I mean, a lot of accusations and stuff like that. And I remember Andrew Dice Clay, I guess, which I did. I mean, him and Sam Kinison came up. Sam Kinison broke first. Andrew Dice Clay broke second. And if you listen to Andrew's earlier albums, there were some jokes on there that are like so similar to what Sam had did, and it was to the point where he was going to do Saturday Night Live, and one of the girls on there, whose contract was up on Saturday Night Live, so she figured she'd try to make a name for herself by saying, I'm not going to appear because I don't approve of Andrew Dice Clay's vulgar comedy, which had nothing to do with how vulgar she was, but she figured if she walked off the show, that'd bring her some notoriety because, you know, she was going up against who was the top comic at the time. And I think it was on the Arsenio Hall show, you know, he asked Dice about that, and he said, you know why? Because I'm the #1 comic on the planet right now. When you're #1 comic on the planet, everybody wants a piece of you, you know? Dane Cook, he was at the top of his game. Everybody wanted a piece of him because they want to be #1. They want to kick it down. They don't want. They're happy you got there, but once you're there, you're now the target. Hey, you're in the spot that I want. The only way to get there is to get you off of it. And same thing's happening with the Ellen DeGeneres show. You know, I mean, she's out there dancing with the presidents, they say, and other comics say, I like to dance with the president. Let's kick Ellen down. Once her spot becomes available, I can slide her in there on my show, and I can be the next Ellen. So. You know, I've often said, once you reach the top, there's only one direction to go, and that's down. So, even on a local level, you know, I'm on a local level. I'm doing some of the biggest shows in Massachusetts I'm putting on, and, you know, I'm doing a lot of things, you know, the TV show, the podcast, making movies, you know, and instead of people just being happy for you, they just want to kick you down because they get some notoriety. They're on the little social media. Well, I can't make it in the real comedy world, but I'll be a comedian attacking Dennis Wirth on the social media platform. That's how people recognize me, you know. So, hey, you know, when you're at the top of your game, there's only one place to go, and it's down. So, you want to attack Dane Cook, attack him. Because I can relate to that, too, because I've been attacked many a times in comedy, and I just kind of laugh it off, because nobody ahead of me's ever attacked me. It's always people behind me that attack me, you know. So if you're behind me in the game, then why would I really listen to what you have to say? So you become a target, I guess. And Dane was a target. And I guess the other thing we had to talk about, and this one's sad. I mean, this one made news, and I guess even probably if you want to put this up, it was as popular as career at the time because this could have happened to anybody, and when it's family, it's twice as tough. Dane Cook's half-brother, Daryl, okay? Now, this is his half-brother. This is his family right here. He was his business manager until 2008, when I guess Dane got a call from the FBI and found out that his half-brother, his family, as it was embezzling millions of dollars from Dane. And I guess it was said he called him up and he said, you know, we're going to transfer you from managing me, you know, same money, but we're going to put you in a different part. But I need you to send all the financial stuff over to my new person who's doing it. He kept holding up on sending the paperwork, and finally he was wondering why, and the FBI contacted him and said, hey, Dane, you're broke. This guy's embezzling all your money. And that's got to be such a... I remember his parents said, I mean, he just lost his mom and his dad, and you only got a little bit of family left, and you find out they're embezzling. I mean, that's stuff that it just... You know, you start questioning humanity at that point. Forget comedy, and I guess he must have went to jail for it, and now here's the top comic of the time, and all of a sudden he's broke, and they said, you know, well, how'd you make your money back? And I say, you know, when you get kicked down, it's easy to stay down. The people who win are the people who get up, dust themselves off, and keep going forward. You set a goal, and I don't care how many times you get kicked down, you get back up and you keep going for that goal. Babe Ruth once said it's tough to beat a guy who never gives up. So how do you turn a negative into a positive? He took the little bit of money that he did have left and he started renting out the arenas like the Gardens. And he rented them out, and people that came out, you know, you can rent a big place like that, just like you can rent the local hall, and the fans still came out for him. That was how he made his money back, was he went on a tour, he rented out all the big arenas, and fans came out and gave him his money back. But I've heard a lot of people say that, even in bands and comedy, and when you hit that level, you're on the road so much, you're doing this, they're doing that, there's money flying all over the place, and a lot of people that end up broke, they say, you know, there's so much money flying everywhere, it's impossible to keep track of it all. So, you know, everybody's taking a little here, taking a little there, whatever business you're in, you know. You want to do something, you got to grease the local politicians, you got to grease this guy. Even in comedy, you want to accomplish something, you got to grease people, okay? That's kind of how it works. If you put on a show, okay, well, you want to be on somebody else's show, then they better be on your show. You better grease them a little bit. So, welcome to comedy. But, I mean, after losing your mom and your dad and finding out your half-brother did that to you, that could have been the end of Dane Cook. But he said, you know what? I'm not going to take the negative route. I'm going to take the positive route. And he figured out a way, and he got back on top. And that separates the winners from the losers right there. So are you a winner or you a loser? You going to let something knock you down this week? Or are you going to laugh about it? Figure out how to turn a negative into a positive. And I've done that many times. I've been attacked so many times. And, if I didn't get attacked so many times, I might have quit comedy, who knows, years ago. Because I love to do it, but it's such a dirty business. So your love of doing comedy has to outweigh the dirtiness of the business. And I got to the point where the dirtiness of the business was overcoming my love for comedy. And I thought, should I do this? But then when somebody kicks you down, it's like, oh, you want to kick me down? All right, I'll prove it. And it's like, I just want to do something bigger just to show them I'm the guy you kick down, which that happened to me a lot, When I was a young comic, I reached out to so many people, and they wouldn't even return my messages, Then all of a sudden, I start putting on some of the biggest shows in comedy in Massachusetts, and I'm getting messages from these same people. Hey, Den, buddy, how you doing? Yeah, I'm your buddy now. Yeah, fuck you, buddy. Okay, but, hey, that's comedy. What do you do in life? Dane Cook, what a storied career. You can kick him down. You can say what you want. I can tell you this much. He was the #1 comic on the planet, and nobody stays there forever, but few can say they got there. And this guy, he was the #1 comic for a short period of time, and his legend will live on. Just like I hope this podcast lives on with the legend. You're telling your friends, you're telling your neighbors. Tune in. This is Funny Like Clown Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth. Hey, we do comedy, and next week, if he calls in, I got a special guest for you, so let's hope this guy calls in, and long live comedy. Tell somebody a joke this week. Good night.